stand by for action.
Thanks, Jody. My name is Dave Miller. I am the Unpleasant Blind Guy. I want to thank Philip Burns for kind comments about my show, Less Than. On June the 6th, 2017, I was interviewed by a gentleman named Mark the Bloviating Zeppelin. Kind of a strange-sounding name, I understand, but Mark runs a very interesting and enlightening program on SHR Media called BZ's Berserk, Bobcat, Saloon. This can be heard Tuesdays and Thursdays at 11 p.m. Eastern, and I encourage everyone to listen because Mark's experience is wide. His thought is deep, and his support of his country is steadfast. And if you can't make it, Mark can be heard in archive on his SHR Media page at Spreaker.com. Just search for Berserk, Bobcat, Saloon. Given the recent spate of terrorist attacks in the United Kingdom, Mark brought me in for some commentary, and I'm bringing the show that we did to you in two parts, because Mark's insights are not to be missed.
We're going to talk about a lot of things tonight. I expect that you know that this is going to be probably mostly about Islam because of all the things that have occurred recently. First of all, there are actually a couple of people in chat who may not be familiar with you and may not have heard any of your shows. Before we go any further, Dave, can you tell us who you are and where you can be found, your shows, sites, Twitter, anything and everything? Please, Dave Milner.
Okay, if you want to contact me, I'm a UBG contact on Twitter. That's where you can contact me with comments, questions, show suggestions, also American suggestions. It's the main contact point for my show, which is the Unpleasant Blind Guy, which can be heard on High Plains Talk Radio at, I think, 8 o'clock in the morning, and other times also on SHR Media. I'm on at 1 p.m., Monday through Friday, and at midnight on Saturday Eastern. These times are all Eastern. Midnight Saturday, that's when I drop my new shows, and that's basically it. I'm also on the English Defense League radio program where I panel with host Jeff Mitchell and the much better-looking and hotter panelist Jan Rennie, our secret weapon for news. So that's basically it, Mark.
So tell me now, you've got an EDL show coming up this Thursday, correct?
Yes, we do.
Okay. And for those of you who are so inclined, you have another EDL show coming up every Thursday and Sunday, too, if I'm not mistaken.
Thursdays and Sundays at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And Thursday, we're going to be welcoming in, we're not only going to be talking about things in the UK, particularly the elections and things like that, but we're also going to be welcoming in Leslie Ann Stovall, who will be giving us a nice debrief on the Million Canadian Deplorables March, which happened June 3rd and 4th. So we're looking forward to that. And she is always an awesome guest. So Thursday, it should be all on and very good. And everyone's welcome to come in. We're at blogtalkradio.com. Just go in there and look for EDL Radio. Bam.
Okay, and for those who also may not know, can you tell us what EDL is, what that stands for?
EDL is the English Defense League. It is what I call the spearhead civil rights organization at the moment in the United Kingdom. It was formed in about 2009 when some British soldiers were coming back from duty. I believe this was in Afghanistan, and they were being harassed by Muslims. And it was basically some of the worst harassment, circa the Vietnam era and things like that had been happening. And someone had decided that they'd had enough of that. They'd also had enough of Muslim child rape gangs, which had been operating in the UK for decades. They had had enough of Muslims trying to enact Sharia law and the British government trying to support them in doing the same thing. So the English Defense League was formed, and it has sprung offshoots all over the planet. And I fell in with him about 4 years ago because I could tell that what is going on in the UK right now is headed right here for the United States. And some of it's already here.
I completely agree.
Yes, I'm very proud to be involved with them. Yeah.
To set the stage for what happened and what we're going to talk about tonight, I'd like to play this for a moment.
Focus of the police investigation. A block of flats in Barking. So far, 12 people have been arrested. Women escorted from the building. These pictures were taken by those living inside. Armed police surround men lying on the floor with their hands behind their backs. The BBC also understands one of the London attackers who died had lived here. We are not naming him at the request of the police, who say it could jeopardise their investigation. But we've spoken to this man who knew him. He says over the past 2 years, the attacker became more and more extreme.
We spoke about a particular attack that happened, and like most radicals, he had a justification for anything, for everything and anything. And that day I realised that I need to contact the authorities.
This man would only speak to the BBC's Asian network if we protected his identity and changed his voice.
He used to listen to a lot of Musa Jibril. I've heard some of this stuff and it's very radical. I'm surprised some of this stuff is still on YouTube and easily accessible. I phoned the anti-terrorist hotline. I spoke to the gentleman. I told him about our conversation and why I think he's been radicalised.
The friend also claims the alleged attacker was not arrested after he was reported and was allowed to keep his passport.
Listen to that. You have a jihadi who's been reported to UK authorities, and the UK authorities, and I use that word very loosely, decided not to do a thing. And oddly enough, isn't it weird that magically that turns out to be one of the guys that's been involved this past Saturday? Dave Milner, are you shocked, sir?
At this point, no, not at all. We have to remember the FBI gave the Brits knowledge last year that the Manchester bomber was a possible threat. And they said, well, they investigated it, and then they put him down lower on the priority list. This time, it was the Italians that warned the UK that one of the London Bridge attackers was planning on an attack. And again, they ignored it. So no, none of this surprises me at all, and I will give you a little bit of an extra. One of those in that apartment building where they arrested those people was the wife, or the ex-wife rather, of one of the attackers. And she had left this individual because not only did he beat her, but because she said that he would not let her daughter watch TV because he thought it would turn her gay, and he would not let his own daughter dance. I mean, this is typical Muslim behavior. And the only thing that surprises me is that she was still in that area. And another thing, Mark, that I found fascinating, suddenly all of those Muslims that lived around him were so shocked that he was radicalized and did all this stuff. It smacks a lot of how you could not find a single Nazi in Germany in 1946. Nobody was ever a Nazi in Germany in 1946. That's what that smacks of, sir.
Exactly.
No, none of it surprises me.
Exactly. Maybe it's time. I'm going to throw some stats in here. And maybe it's time to just start with this right now. 8 major terrorist attacks in Europe with 185 civilians killed and over 700 wounded since March of 2016. So, going back May 22nd, 2017, 22 killed and 59 wounded in Ariana Grande concert. In Stockholm, Sweden, April 7th, 5 killed, 14 wounded. In St. Petersburg, Russia, April 3rd, 2017, 14 killed and 49 wounded. Westminster, March 22nd, 4 killed and 29 wounded. Germany, Berlin, Germany, December 19th, 2016, 11 killed, 48 wounded. After jihadist uses his truck to plow into a busy Christmas market. I'm sure you remember that. Nice, France, July 14th, 2016. 86 killed and over 200 wounded. Those are the stats that the loving, buttery goodness of Islam brings to you, boys and girls. Any thoughts on that, Sir Dave?
Well, let's not forget the unknown number of unreported jihadi attacks that there are. I mean, you have now in countries like Sweden, the police report stabbings, and these stabbings are incredibly good because the victims' heads seem to fall off when these happen. The police departments in these various European and countries and in the UK report these stabbings and these domestic incidents. And it just happens to be Muslims doing it to non-Muslims or Muslims doing it in honor killings or things of that nature. So the stats you're talking about, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's not the everyday stuff, the stuff that goes on every day. And Mark, the left calls people like you and I thisists and thatists and thisophobes and thatophobes.
Exactly.
They don't understand what is going on in these countries that are being Islamized, and Islamized to the point now where the indigenous people of all colors, by the way, so don't throw race into this, lefties, the indigenous peoples are actually beginning to go insane. I'll give you a good example. Mark, do you know what the big vacation spot is in Europe now? Take a guess.
My guess would be it's certainly not Marseille, which is about 95% Muslim. Used to be a beautiful little harbor. Now it's not. Let me guess. It's not Paris because that's gone. It may or may not be London. Dave, I'm afraid you're going to have to tell me.
Cyprus. Their hotels are booked up for over a year at this point because it's the only country that tourists know they can go into and be safe more or less from attack from Muslims. And they have Muslims on Cyprus, but they keep them on the northern end of the island. They don't even let them near the tourists. They're almost fanatical about that. They're making big money right now in Cyprus, and it's a big vacation spot. And this is kind of secondhand. It comes from Jan Rennie, who panels with us on EDL Radio. She was there last year and talking to this Swedish couple, this couple of Swedish guys, I don't know what they're talking about, but anyway, they came there to play golf, all right? And they didn't want to know about the problem in their own country. They pretended like it didn't exist. And yet, Mark, in Sweden, all right, private security forces now outnumber the Swedish army. That should tell you something right
It's
there.
the rape capital of the world. If you have a vagina, the first thing I do is stay the hell away from Sweden.
Oh, they can't. Kel probably told you this. They can't keep brown and black hair dye on the shelves. You know, these wonderful blonde Swedish beauties are dyeing their hair because that's the first thing that these Muslims go for when they go to Sweden. It's like it's a sex arrow for them. They got to have them some of that blonde. It's awful. I mean, that entire country is gone. And as you said, Marseille, gone. France, almost gone. Pretty much gone. As you pointed out yourself, they voted themselves pretty much out of existence by putting in the Macron. That's a term from Quake 4. Look it up, guys. But in the UK, this was scary. Theresa May now has a lead over Jeremy Corbyn, who is the Labour Party candidate. And that is only about 1 point. She has only about a 1 point lead in the polls.
Yep,
That's
just what I heard. And for those people who are not familiar with what's going in, Dave already knows, I know he knows, this Thursday, the UK has an election, and it's going to be between Jeremy Corbyn, basically a dude on the left. I'll make it simple for everyone. He's your standard Mark I, Model 1 leftist. And between Theresa May, who's the current PM, Prime Minister. She was installed last year in July of 2016. And even she's not really what you'd call a hardcore right-winger, but she's certainly more right than Jeremy Corbyn. So the Britons are going to go to the polls this Thursday to decide if they're going to pull a Macron, whether they're going to decide that their future lies left or whether their future lies current status with Theresa May. And you're right. You're absolutely right, Dave. At this point, there is a 1 point difference between the two.
And that could drift to the left. And let's give a little bit more information on Jeremy Corbyn. He is well known to have buddied up with the Irish Republican Army and also with Hamas. He's very tight with the Muslims. So if people in the UK believe that ousting Theresa May will get them more security and fewer terrorist attacks, he'll do the exact opposite. That's how I see it. Because this guy he's basically an indigenous British Sadiq Khan.
Oh,
Sadiq
Khan. Oh, yes. What people need to know is that the UK police now, this is the third terror attack on UK soil in 3 months. 7 people were killed and almost 50 were injured in Saturday's attack. In March, 5 people were killed in a car and knife attack near Parliament in London. 2 weeks ago, 22 people died in that suicide bombing at the concert in Manchester. But what do the British authorities do? You and I both know, effectively, nothing. There's going to be a lot of rhetoric and perhaps a bit of bombast, but there's going to be no fundamental changes to the way the UK addresses Muslim killers and terrorists. For example, the most glaringly obvious thing to me, perhaps to you, would be firearms, for example, are not going to be roundly issued to their police forces. And that's what, I don't know if you remember the guy from Katrina, Lieutenant General Russell Honore, that quote from him. As far as I'm concerned, he's right. The Britons are stuck on stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Stupid.
Yes, they are.
In terms of not addressing the Muslim people living in enclaves, in no-go zones, in London, throughout all other UK cities, attracted there specifically because of the UK's lack of addressing these issues. Dave, consider this.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you this. Why are so many Muslims, maybe even Salafists, going to the UK?
Well, part of it is money. There are several reasons, and I know you've got some, but part of it is money. They're one of the few countries that used to be in the EU bloc that actually had any money. So they can get a lot of very nice welfare there. The other reason is a government that is becoming increasingly Sharia compliant. And, of course, if they elect Jeremy Corbyn, you can put a warp engine on that.
Oh, hell yes.
Those are really the main reasons. And, of course, third, there's a population of indigenous people that they can victimize. There's also that. Because you have many people, not just in the UK, Mark, but in a lot of these European countries, these so-called refugees, or actually just migrants, Muslim migrants, will come to these centers, to these migrant centers, and declare openly, no, I'm not going to work, and yet I want an apartment of my own with some spending money as well, and a clothing allowance. They get all that from the UK. They want first-class treatment, and they want it now, and if they don't get it, they're going to do things like set the place on fire, which was done with one migrant transit center. I think that might have been in Germany. I don't quite recall, but that did happen in one place because the migrants were disgruntled that they weren't being put in apartment buildings immediately, and they were being moved to what we would probably call like a halfway house.
Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. I believe it was Germany, and yes, they did torch it. Virginia Hale wrote an article that said a number of radical Muslims are flocking to move from France to Britain, where, just as you say, Dave, generous welfare payments, lack of scrutiny from the authorities, and ease with which families can practice strict Islam have earned the UK a reputation as a halal paradise for Salafists who are unable to secure visas for Saudi Arabia. You and I know what a Salafist is, and that's this: one of the most stringent of limited practices of Islam. They are fundamentalists. They take the Quran basically word for word, very strictly.
Yeah, they basically call the Wahhabists Uncle Toms.
There's a neighborhood in Birmingham, I believe, called Small Heath. 95% of the residents there practice Islam. And that's sort of the paradise vacation spot for French Muslims who are seeking a new home because, as I think you already know, France banned the burqa. Now, the burqa is the full beekeeper uniform. France banned the burqa in 2010, so it's liberating for Muslims to go to the UK because that's not what happens in France. They can wear the burqa in the UK. As far as they're concerned, it's cool for them. There's single-sex gymnasiums now. There's pool schedules with segregated swimming. Shops now that have prayer rooms and prayer rugs, and hospitals. Women can demand to be seen now by a female doctor only. Schools play a huge part in that to move to Britain. They don't have to be subject to television. They don't have to be subject to, just as you said, the homosexual propaganda in French state schools. See, in any other culture, that would be called homophobia. That would acquire an instant label. But, Dave, do you see, how many leftists do you see labeling Muslims as homophobic?
Almost none.
Yeah, I can't say that I really find them.
Bill Maher is about the only one, and the reason they don't label them as homophobic is for the same reason that the Labour Party and, sadly, too many idiots in the Conservative Party in the UK are welcoming them. It all comes down to votes. They want to blow up the ballot box. And that's why Justin Trudeau is fast enacting almost everything you just talked about in Canada. These things are happening very quickly in Canada. This isn't, what you're talking about happened in the UK over about 20 or 30 years. This is happening in Canada over about half that time. And there are huge Muslim enclaves. One of the enclaves over there has over 1 million Muslims in it. So their problems with Islam in the UK are very, very deep.
One of the Muslims quoted in this article said, "We are really caught in the crossfire. Europe doesn't like us, but we're not really welcome in the Gulf states either. They say to you, 'Go home, brother. We have nothing for you here.'" But for the Salafists, though, who absolutely demand that they live in strict accordance with Islamic teachings, there's nothing easier than going to the UK. There's a generous welfare package. There's public services delivered free. Plenty of work available if they want it. Most don't. And all with no visa or residence permits required. But they don't get it. They absolutely don't get it. We just named off, Dave, 3 incidents in 3 months in the UK. Then I named all the incidents that killed hundreds of people throughout Europe. But again, the UK is on the cusp of going left again, just as France did. So I have to ask you, Dave, what do you think is going to happen on Thursday?
It's a difficult question to answer because you have UKIP, which is the United Kingdom Independence Party. And it has, in the past, drawn a lot of votes. And it could draw off a lot of votes from the Conservative Party. That's one of the things that should worry people who are backing the Conservatives, because they could wind up losing because of this. That said, Jeremy Corbyn is not having the best press at the moment. His terrorism, as they call it, his terrorism supremo, we would say like his terrorism czar, ducked out of an important radio interview claiming she was sick, and it was spotted out and about later, having a good time, after she couldn't answer some vital questions in a TV interview. So really, the Labour Party can't come out and say, well, we're not going to do a damn thing about Islam. They can't do that. So they're beginning to duck out of things. But at this point, it might be too late because too many people are blaming the one that's in office for these 3 terrorist attacks and all the other stuff that's going on right now. And that is why I honestly don't know. My hope is that they will stick with May. She's not a great choice, but she's certainly better than anything else. But if enough votes are drawn off by UKIP, they could very well have a super mega leftist in the seat of the PM on Friday morning. I'm just hoping not. I know that we're going to be working hard, I'm pretty sure, on EDL Radio to try and press this point. You don't want to go from the frying pan into the fire. If you think things are bad in the UK now, just wait. Put in Jeremy Corbyn and see how much worse they can get.
Well, the funny thing about Jeremy Corbyn, and it's not funny, it's funny, weird, not funny, ha-ha, for fuck's sake, is that he used that massacre, the various massacres, as a pretext to call on Theresa May to resign. Because his point was when she was Home Secretary between 2010 and 2016, before she became PM, Prime Minister, she reduced the number of British police officers by 20,000 as part of the Conservative government's cost cutting. So that came roundabout to strike a smack right dab in the face. And so she's going to have to suffer the brunt of that. I'm sure she didn't see all of this stuff brewing. I don't think she's smart enough. Do you have any confidence, Dave, in UK authorities, leaders, air quotes, leaders or not, do you have confidence that they can pull themselves out of this? Is there an extraction? Can it be saved?
There's not a peaceful extraction, not at this point. They have 2 directions they can go now. They can either go in the direction of capitulation, and it can either be fast or slow depending on which party is elected. They can do that, or they can actually try and clamp down on Islam and save their own people, in which case there will be riots, there will be blood in the streets, there will be civil war. And honestly, Mark, I don't think they want to do that because They don't want to be the ones held responsible for the riots of 2017. And that's a terrible thing to say, but as I see it, those are the only two directions that they have to go at this point. There's not going to be a peaceful and painless way out of it, and you know that politicians love peaceful and painless ways out of things. It ain't there anymore.
No, I'm afraid it's not. I have a cut here that a gentleman by the name of Majid Nawaz spoke to Fox News' Martha McCallum. Now, he is a former extremist and has come over to the other side, so to speak. And I'd like to play a few things that he happened to say recently about his interpretation of what's going on these particular days in the UK.
Tonight, 3 cold-blooded attacks in 3 months in England, and no signs of sheer terror abating anytime soon. In March, a lone wolf killed 4 people in a brutal rampage at the Parliament. 2 weeks later, in Manchester, or 2 weeks ago, rather, a suicide bomber murdered 22 children were among the dead there. And now 50 hours ago, 7 innocent lives taken by terrorists on London Bridge and Borough Market. British Prime Minister Theresa May and London Mayor Sadiq Khan are taking heat for their reserved responses to the terror. But President Trump not holding back what he thinks in a series of tweets saying this: pathetic excuse by London Mayor Sadiq Khan, who had to think fast on his, quote, no reason to be alarmed statement. MSM, mainstream media, working hard to sell it, he says. Joining me now, chairman of the Trillium think tank and a former Islamic extremist, Majid Nawaz. Majid, thank you for being here tonight. It's good to have you with us this evening. You know, you listened to that list, and we played the soundbite from our last conversation back in March when you warned that there would be much more to come. I suppose you're sorry you were right.
Indeed. And I think we have to come to terms, Martha, with the fact that Europe, Britain and the rest of Europe are in the midst of a full-blown jihadist insurgency. You were citing figures earlier that our security services are attempting to monitor around 23,000 suspected jihadists.
Listen to that. 23,000 suspected jihadists. That's an incredible figure. But they brought them. They wanted them. Now they got them.
That, by the way, is out of a population in the UK of just 5% that are Muslim, which means that 23,000 from 4 million Muslims in this country, and around those 23,000, that's those who are jihadists, around them will be those who sympathize with the ideology, Islamists, who believe in establishing a caliphate, and around them those who empathize with their friends who happen to be Islamists. If that's not insurgency levels, I don't know what is.
Insurgency levels. This from a former extremist himself. But Dave, with numbers like that, 23,000 essentially known jihadis, the door was opened. You don't have a police force. It's been reduced. They don't even have firearms at ready disposal. What can you do if you're a country like that? What can you do?
It's worse than that. This is not all Theresa May's fault. Some of this was brought in by David Cameron.
Oh, yes.
And some of this was brought in before David Cameron took them.
God,
okay.
Yes.
Mosques, okay? The police cannot enter a mosque without the permission of the imam. They have to ask permission before they can enter a mosque just to search it. They cannot bring in sniffer dogs because dogs are unclean in the Islamic, quote-unquote, religion. And, of course, they have to take off their shoes. So what you have is mosques, being the command and control centers that they are, able to store up all kinds of weapons or whatever supplies, whatever the jihadis need. They can do that. And, hey, if the British authorities want to search the mosque, there's plenty of time to clean the place out so that they find nothing. And what he was saying about the people around the insurgents, those are the moderate Muslims, okay? And listen, I'm one of these people. I think the numbers are flipped. I don't think that it's 20% of Muslims that want jihad. I think it's 20% of Muslims that don't, all right? And it's the rest that do. It's just the vast majority that support the few of the ones that actually go out there and get their knuckles grazed with money and with silence and with any other assistance that they can give. And that's what happens when you have these enclaves, because they're perfect breeding grounds, perfect hiding places. It's a wonder, honestly, that they catch any of these people at all. Because at this point, it's almost at a stage where they can just hand them off from one city to another, city to another city and even get them out of the country if they need to. That's how bad it's gotten. And again, this has to be emphasized, Mark. This is not just the UK. If we do not get a handle on this, this will be us, and not in very many years either.
No, we just had the State Department to decide of its own that it was going to undermine the precepts of President Trump, and on its own decided that it was going to allow many more refugees in from various countries like Syria, when we fully well know the refugees that we see are primarily of male combat age. But you talk about moderate Muslims. People talk right about moderate Muslims and about them being good people. Number one, I tend to agree with you in terms of those numbers, that it's probably flipped. And of course, there are good Muslims, I'm sure of it. That may be true. But I submit that those people that are termed moderate Muslims are really not good practicing Muslims as demanded in the Quran and the Hadith.
Oh, no, they're not.
It should come as no shock that Islam is judged primarily by acts committed in its name. I have a saying that I've said it for years now. Islam is as Islam does. And I also have the Beezy's reversal theory. What about this? What if all the acts of terror that were committed by Islam were committed in the name of, say, Catholicism? What do you think would happen? Long ago, we would have had burning Catholic churches all across Europe. And there would have been burned Catholic churches in the United States and other countries as well. So,
Mark, in the 2016 election, you had Democrats passing around memes saying that if Trump or any Republican was elected in 2016, that we would go back to the Dark Ages, and it would be the time of the Inquisition and and the Christian Crusades, not knowing that actually the Crusades were a good thing, but they were saying it would be a dark age led by Christians. So your premise here is a really good one, because the left are more than ready to destroy any vestige that there possibly could remain of Christianity, because one of the things that Christianity preaches is free thought.
Join me next time as Mark the Bloviating Zeppelin and I continue our conversation on these very important topics. And that's it for this time. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for listening, and may your God go with you. Goodbye. The Unpleasant Blind Guy is copyright 2017. Anno Domini.